Good morning, guys. Wednesday, the 17th of June. Obviously, we have got our Teams lesson on Friday, and I will send a reminder out later on so that you know what time it is. I'll also put the link in Show My Homework as well as the link on your school emails. Please encourage everyone that you know in our classes to join that, please. And if they need some help with how to get into the meeting and click on the link, please go through how they do that with them. It would be great to get more in each class there on Friday. So, interesting lesson today. As I said the other day when we kind of went through Jon Snow and Edwin Chadwick, we're moving on to look at World War One and the 20th century. So we've worked through the 1800s with Simpson, Lister, Pasteur, Koch, Snow, Chadwick and public health, and you know so much about that through revision. And we're now beginning to look at the 20th century, so the 1900s. And the key learning question today that I want you to write down in your books or on paper or type is: what impact did World War II have on the development of surgery? So we'd usually, as you can see from my slide here, stick in the image and annotate it. But I understand not all of you have printers, which is absolutely fine, so you don't need to do that. But I wanted to just look at it and think about what treatments there are nowadays that could help any of these injured soldiers in this picture here. So press pause and have a think. Okay, so you've probably seen in the image that there's obviously just down here the guy on the floor who's been there for a while in the trenches. In between the trenches there, it's probably no man's land. You can see the impact of the bombardments and the shells creating those craters where water's pooling from the rain. So treatments that be available, you'd probably nowadays obviously have more vaccinations against diseases. You would also have morphine to relieve the pain. You would also have developed anaesthetics as pain relief. You would also have cleaner amputations, x-rays to support them for any broken bones. You would have even simple things like paracetamol for pain relief. You would also have trained doctors, and the technology inside the hospitals today is so much more developed, even with the ECGs and all the information that they use before looking at symptoms and then treating. So it's much more developed nowadays. But obviously you can see from the images the challenge question suggests, asks you to do. You need to look at it and think about World War One, but you'll all remember this from year 8, that World War One was a bloody war, and that more people died in World War One than any other war. If you're talking about including disease in there, and you actually have more people dying of infection and disease during World War One than in any other war, because penicillin was mass produced during World War Two and used when America came into the war. So World War One was a tough war, fought on the Western Front in Belgium and France, and conditions were really poor. Fought between Britain and France on one side, along with some support from Russia, and on the other side Germany, Italy and Austria. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction to World War One just there. Just moving on to the next slide. This was what you saw in the starter, so it's a bit clearer, okay? And the question that I asked you was up there, but if you did want to look at it in a bit of detail and annotate it, you can do that now. But you can see, just from what we're talking about here, men here taking wounded soldiers on the stretcher off the battlefield. You've got medics working with slings and patching up any wounds there. They tended to have these bags with small little bits of equipment in and bandages and a little bit of morphine to relieve the pain, but not developed at all at that point. It would probably be more ether. You would have here, you can see in the background the impact of the actual type of warfare, and you know trench warfare was very much machine guns and bayonets, so it was a war of attrition, as you all know, and many stalemates were created between one side and the other, and this area being no man's land. Many bodies of British and German soldiers were sometimes left and the corpses were actually eaten and rats fed off them as well. So a disgusting area with barbed wire as well here, which was used to prevent them from getting into each other's trenches, and all of which you understand and you know from year 8. But today, obviously, these treatments that we could offer these injured soldiers would be much more developed due to better training of doctors, different types of people within the NHS and free treatment, and so on and so forth. So it would be much better today. As you can see, just going through a couple of points that are going to come up on the board. The fact that the scalpel's developed, the fact that they're beginning to get x-rays, the fact that we can have blood transfusions just here. Okay, so just a couple of things that are being developed. The thing with blood transfusions is the key thing is they need to know the blood type now. And we can do that now, and people can give blood and we can store blood. But at the time these were being developed, sometimes they needed to make sure they understood, obviously, who was what blood type. Some technology used to take blood, and x-rays being developed as well by Harry Gillies, who we're going to have a look at. And finally, in the middle, obviously the development of some vaccinations that started way back with Jenner. Okay, so just a little bit of context of World War I to get you thinking, and you can see where we kind of are. These I will hand out when you're in class, and make sure that you have space to stick these down on yellow sheets. So you've got your 4 sections for medicine. This is the last part, guys, and we've kind of touched on 1, 2 and 3 already. We're having a look at kind of 5 today, so we're going to come back and look at them all together really over the next 3 or 4 lessons before we have a look at finally the NHS and what the 21st century medicine looks like today. So I'm envisaging that we certainly will finish this definitely before we come back in September, touch wood, and we'll be moving on to a new topic then. Okay, the next activity for you is just to have a look at the impact of war and technology on health. Okay, so looking at those images there, what we'll be studying, can you work out the keywords from the captions underneath? A little bit on chronology as well, another task just up here. Can you name the dates of World War I and World War II? Can you make sure you understand what these key words are, and then have a think about a bullet pointed answer to that question? So there's quite a lot to have a go at here, and just give yourself some good time. So press pause and come back when you're ready. Okay, off you go. Right, okay, so let's start up here with chronology. So all of you hopefully have got the dates. So World War I was 1914 to 1918. We've hopefully got World War II right from 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland and Churchill declared war, to 1945. We'll come back to these keywords in a second once we've had a look at the images, but from the captions here you've probably got plastic surgery being developed for the first time, first types of plastic surgery, which are nowhere near as advanced as today, but mainly looking at how they can treat people's wounds. X-rays, the idea that these were beginning to be developed. The Dig for Victory campaigns and health campaigns, which were so important during World War II. Okay, not so much World War I, but this is moving on to World War II and the rationing and so on, and the healthy diet we'll talk about later. This one here, which are leg splints to support people recovering from amputations. And then we have blood transfusions that are being developed. Okay, so just to come down to the key words here, shell shock is a psychological condition, guys, that is developed by some soldiers that have been exposed to this type of warfare, which is, you know, very horrific, as you know from World War I, and that tends to affect them, and they can't sleep, and mentally they have nightmares and shock around what it was like during World War I. Blood transfusions is what it says on the tin. It's transfusing and giving other people blood to ensure that they don't lose too much blood when they're injured. Again, knowing the blood type is important here. And x-rays, we know what x-rays are. If you break a bone, there is this radiography, and that you can have kind of a picture taken of those bones to work out where the breaks are. The last question underneath here, how far has war been the main factor in development of modern surgery? Well, that's an interesting one, because if we're talking about modern surgery, and if you get a question around modern surgery, it will be the 20th century. And in the 20th century, there are two main wars. And what happens with war is it does speed up the development of medicine, because people are trying new things, people are looking into new things, and people are wanting to try and create cures and treatments for certain diseases, and also for certain wounds. So yes, war does speed up medical development, but also alongside it, you obviously have technological advancements in hospitals. You have education of the surgeons and different types of people. You have the development of the NHS. You also have communication and ideas being spread and developed from throughout the world, and with communication getting better and aeroplanes increasing and shipping developing, you can get ideas around much better. Individuals also are very important, but technically I think war definitely is up there alongside science and technology. If I was looking for the key factors, religion wouldn't really play a part at all. Chance wouldn't really play a part at all, apart from with penicillin. Okay, so next I'm just going to ask you a really simple question and give you some thinking time. Think about 5 effects on war, of war, I should say, on medicine. Okay, so just have a little think about that. Okay, if you wanted to, you could draw around your hand and have the 5 effects in each finger and the thumb. But it's completely up to you. You can bullet point them if you need to. Okay, once you've done that, you probably will be thinking, okay, 5 effects of war on medicine. It's going to speed up medical development. There are going to be more experiment, different types of wounds to look into. Medicine in terms of pain relief will develop even further. Medicine and the impact of technology will be developed even further. They'll be able to look at different wounds during wars and test different things like plastic surgery and x-rays during wars. So war generally speeds up medical progression, and they can experiment more and learn more. If we just move on to a bit of context of all of these medical advancements. So the key thing is that it develops faster during war than peacetime. And you should understand that by actually stopping to think. Of course, if there are more injuries during wartime and more things to deal with and problems to solve, there's going to be more experimentation in medicine, and therefore you will get things developing at a faster rate. The governments pour a lot of money into developing ways of getting their injured soldiers back as well, and they want them fighting fit. So government are a key player here, because they actually pump money in to make sure that these soldiers recover, because they need them on the battlefront to fight against the enemy. And I think the key point probably here is that actually doctors and surgeons during wartime are working even harder, because they're thinking all the time around how they can develop ideas to treat different types of wounds. So there's this general sense, as you can see there, the picture at the top, of a pace during wartime in medical development and certainly progress. Okay, so in a weird way, war could have a positive effect on medicine, because we could develop more treatments quicker. We could get more cash into the system, so that scientists can develop ideas, and doctors and surgeons can practice them, and also money into the technology that's needed. So in answer to that question at the bottom, is quite a weird question to actually answer, because you can include quite a couple of key points from what we've been talking around, but the key idea is that medical advancements speed up during wartime due to the money of governments pouring in and wanting to get soldiers back on the battlefront at World War I, and also doctors and surgeons work even harder in wartime to develop the ideas. The next part of the lesson, guys, it was going to be a video around medicine in World War One, not two, World War One. I'm going to not play that through here, but I'll put the link on the slides, which I'll also post on Show My Homework, so you can actually access that if you need to, and just get a taste of how medicine was speeding up during wartime. Certainly in World War One, there were lots of things that were tested at the time. What I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about now are 7 kind of key areas of medical developments in the 20th century. And I'm just going to explain what impact World War One, not World War Two, but World War One had on some of these key areas. In fact, I'm going to bring some of World War Two in. I think that's what I'm going to do, because some of these factors here were not actually developed in World War One, but some were. Okay, so before we start blood transfusions, let's just start down here. Okay, in a weird way, but I want to talk about this first. They'd been tried for centuries, blood transfusions, but it wasn't really until about 1900 that scientists worked out how to do them successfully, because there was a guy called Karl Landsteiner, which is Landsteiner, and he was a massively important individual because he discovered blood groups, and blood groups then helped doctors to work out that a transfusion only works if the donor's blood type matches the receiver's. So really, really, really important. The problem was that it wasn't possible to store blood because they didn't know they had to freeze it so it would clot up. And as a result, many people would still die from loss of blood. But in 1914, at the start of World War One, it was discovered that actually they needed to start freezing them and pack ice around them. But it was used, it started to use during World War One and developed in World War Two. Because during World War II, with blood transfusions, just to link it in, actually, because they could store it and freeze it, it just was much easier. And there was something created just before the war called the British National Blood Transfusion Service, where actually there were large blood banks, and obviously today I go and give blood, and then they obviously can be used for whoever is the same blood type as me. So blood transfusions is a key point. When I'm talking through these guys, please press pause, but there's no way you're going to be able to make points in your notes on everything I'm saying. I'm just talking around it a bit like a lecturer would do. We're going to move on to plastic surgery next in a slightly different order again. So during World War One, it basically was attempted. So someone called Harold Gillies, or Gillies, Gillies. He was based in London. He was an army doctor, and he was basically developing and leading on a development called plastic surgery. And it's basically a special unit was set up to graft skin from different parts of the patient's bodies and actually use it to treat some kind of severe facial wounds initially. So he was one of the first surgeons to consider a patient's appearance when treating wounds, but obviously they treated so many and practiced on so many, but you'll be able to Google and have a look at Harold Gillies' work. It's nowhere near as developed as what we can see with plastic surgery today at all. Something that's not on here, which I'm just going to touch on, is X-rays, because X-rays were a big breakthrough in World War One. X-rays became really important because they had mobile X-ray machines that were used near battlefields, believe it or not, in World War One. And they found out exactly where the wounded soldier's body, exactly where bullets were and pieces of shrapnel were lodged through using X-rays, and also obviously broken bones. So that was really, really important. Still lots of infection during World War One on the battlefields because they still didn't have antibiotics. Lots of broken bones, and we saw a leg splint that was used as well in World War One. But the key thing I mentioned that isn't here was obviously shell shock as well, and a condition known as PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Any of you who have relatives or older members of your family that have maybe served in battlefields and seen kind of combat will know colleagues or who have suffered from that. It's awful, and it tends to be panic attacks and psychological damage is done for the soldiers actually seeing what the harsh reality of battle. So that's kind of World War One, but we'll touch on a couple more now, because you get drug development, heart surgery, an idea on poverty and diet in the NHS in World War Two. So I know this is strange because we're looking at medicine, but remember it's a breadth study. It's not a depth study. So it's just knowing about how things slowly develop through the 20th century. And we do have a lot of drug development. Penicillin being the first antibiotics produced by Fleming, starting in 1929, and then enough of it was produced by America in the war to treat all of the Allied forces in Europe. And it really did lower the death rate because so many in World War One were dying of disease. Heart surgery did actually begin to progress, which was a big breakthrough in World War II. And there was an American surgeon called Dwight Harken, Harken. He was actually stationed in London, and he cut into beating hearts and used his bare hands to remove the bullets and bits of shrapnel. Oof, gory. And his findings helped heart surgery develop greatly after the war. So that was a big breakthrough during World War II. The idea of poverty in both wars, really. I think there was always quite a lot of children in particular living in poverty in some of the cities, certainly near the factories during World War I and then into World War II. We had evacuation, obviously, which you may have done at primary school or in year 8. So it was part of the reason why, number 3, the NHS was set up, that these hosts in the countryside saw these kind of poor city children coming out not knowing how to brush their teeth or use the lavatory or look after their own personal hygiene. So during the war, over 1 million children were evacuated in World War II. Afterwards, there was the problem of poverty began to be addressed by the Labour government, who set up the NHS. It's an interesting kind of idea as well in World War I and II, but more too around diet. And because the shortages of food were apparent due to the German U-boats blocking any supplies coming from America, and also due to Hitler's idea that he could isolate Britain as an island and really push it and squeeze it. So the problem was that shortages of some of the foods during wartime meant the government did actually encourage people to grow their own, which is good. So they grew their own food, and people's diets actually improved because they're obviously encouraged to eat fresh vegetables from their own garden and become healthier. Rationing is also introduced in there as well. And then the big one, which is the NHS, the final one, which is set up after World War II by someone's work called Aaron Bevan, who was a Labour Minister of Health from Wales. His kind of context was he had a mining background, but he wanted to take the idea of this poor health of kids in cities that the hosts found from the evacuees and actually develop a free health service called the National Health Service, which we're lucky to have today, where we have, the NHS have been fantastic, haven't they, during the last 3 months. But it's not just the nurses and the doctors, there's so much more in the NHS that you need to remember, not just the physios and the psychologists, but there's so many different types and branches within the NHS. I won't go into every one, but it's such an important institution that actually developed because of World War II. Okay, so a little bit on comparing the wars. Have a go at this. Okay, it's tough because we haven't gone into detail on all of them, but let's see how you get on. So either say, did this develop during World War One? Was it used in World War One or World War Two, or both? Okay, so the first one obviously is both because plastic surgery was used in both. I'll let you have a go at it and just do it out loud. You don't necessarily need to write anything down. X-rays is both. So use of the army leg splint, or something called the Keller-Blake splint, which is the same because it's the person who invented it. So leg splint was also in both. And obviously the soaking of the wound in a salty saline solution that's just built on a little bit of the work of Lister, but even more so into the 20th century is both. Use of penicillin's a tricky one because it's obviously just World War II, because the use of penicillin didn't develop until Fleming did his work. Blood transfusions is both. Storing blood on the battlefield using sodium citrate or citrate is both, although they did begin to freeze the blood more in World War II. Heart surgery is World War II. Encouraging a healthy diet due to food shortages is more World War II when we have the rationing. Evacuation obviously is World War II. Setting up the National Blood Transfusion Services too, and finally treating shell shock properly with psychologists is too. Okay, right. Just to finish off today, and what we'll do, obviously on Friday, is go through this in more detail. But I'm fully aware, the video is only at 25 minutes, but this is going to take you an hour if you're going to use it properly. So please don't rush it. Come back to it and use a video when you need to at any time before Friday. But this is just a little plenary to see if you can fix the issues here. Okay, so press pause in a minute. But have a look at 1 to 6, and there's a problem with each of them. There's a mistake that I've purposefully made with each of these. I want you to try and fix the mistake with everyone. Okay, so again, you don't necessarily need to write them all down, although you can do once you've corrected them, but I want you to do some thinking and work out where the mistakes are. Okay, press pause. Okay, so Harold Gillies began to use plastic surgery. That's actually in World War One, so the mistake is there. 2, due to food shortages in World War One, the government began to promote healthy eating and growing your own food. Well, obviously the change there is this happened in World War Two with rationing. Medicine usually develops at a slower rate during wartime than peacetime. That's incorrect because it develops at a faster rate. Penicillin was used in World War One is also incorrect because it's World War Two. Looking at a varied diet became popular to originally help blocked arteries. Well, no, it became popular because of the government's idea to ration, and so therefore people were eating their own vegetables. The NHS was set up by a Conservative government after World War One. That's also incorrect because it's set up by a Labour government after World War Two. Okay, so that is the lesson. It's an overview. I know I spoke for a long time when we were doing this activity here. Where are we? Because the level of detail there, it would have been me, you'd have been going into depth and looking at sources, and for me to ask you to print all that off is just silly. So again, with a lot of that, you might need to pause what I'm saying and take some points down, because you're not going to remember everything I'm going through on that activity. Right, guys, I'll send out the invite through Show My Homework and emails today. Could you please, again, I'll just repeat, encourage people you know in the class to get into those lessons, because I don't want them to miss the chance to talk to each other and to check your understanding. I just don't want them to fall behind. So please get as many people into that lesson as you can. Even if it's maybe forwarding on the link to other people, personal emails if they can't get into school emails, or talking them through how to get on to Teams. But I'll speak to you all on Friday. Okay, have a good day.